Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and deceased. It is I, Mighty Sophia, here to break down for you guys the latest episode of The Walking Dead. I apologize to those of you who have been watching my Limitless reviews. I know I haven't been doing those, but today's topic of discussion, of course, is the episode Here's Not Here. So spoiler alert, before we dive into the mad thick of things, as I shall be bearing all in this review, if I can enunciate properly. But anyway, so I am a huge fan of character-centric episodes, and we haven't necessarily gotten a ton of those in The Walking Dead before. We've gotten moments, or actually, I mean, there was the time that we got to go into the backstory of the governor after the fall of the prison and things of that nature, but getting this entire 90-minute chapter dedicated solely to where Morgan was before rejoining the group at Alexandria, or really joining them for the first time, it was an incredibly powerful experience. I mean, I am freaking impressed by this episode. I think that it serves a very important purpose in the grand scheme of things, because for those of us who were looking at Morgan's actions in the last episode where the Alexandrians are facing off against the wolves, for those of us who were looking at what Morgan was doing and saying, bro, what the actual fuck? Like, what are you doing? Clearly these guys are deserving of death. And yet Morgan so capably wards them off and tells them to simply go, unwittingly sending them in the direction of his other friends and jeopardizing their lives. But then there's the tribe of us who finds him to be a total badass, which I think you can simultaneously be like, what the crap are you doing, and admiring someone's badassery. Those two things do not have to be mutually exclusive. And that's kind of where I was at, because Morgan's methods and approach to the world strongly contrast that of, say, Carol, who goes ham and takes out every possible threat in sight. Whereas to Morgan, the only way to properly mitigate those threats is to ensure that everybody walks away still breathing and functioning in the brain parts. So yeah, it's funny to think how we can simultaneously love these different characters, and yet their worldviews are so completely antithetical. And that's what this episode really goes to show, is just how differently Morgan thinks now. How for him, it's either life is meaningless and everything needs to be destroyed, including himself, or life is purposeful and everybody lives. I mean, it certainly doesn't seem like the kind of perspective that you can really employ to survive in this new world order. I mean, you think of characters like Dale, who bit the dust pretty quick, refusing to adapt to the violence of the world. And I mean, I'm definitely more concerned now than ever before for the fate of the group, being that Morgan continues to choose not to kill, even when these people threaten to take out everyone, like everyone in Alexandria, men, women, and children alike. It's kind of mind-boggling to me that the part of Eastman's story that Morgan clings to is the part where Eastman tells him that getting revenge against the psychotic killer who took out his family was ultimately not satisfying. Instead of realizing that because life is sacred, because it has meaning, because everything in life is about people, I'm going to do everything that I can possibly do to protect people. But at this point, it seems like Morgan is still in a deeply introspective place where he is trying very hard to adhere to the book, to Eastman's worldview, to aikido, I believe is what it's called, the art of not killing, the art of making peace. Unfortunately, I think that he is going to unintentionally bring about a lot more violence through his actions, and that's either something he's willing to risk or he's not cognizant of. But I mean, despite the PTSD, despite the trauma that Morgan has worked his way through, he is nonetheless an extremely intelligent guy. So it seems unlikely to me that he hasn't possibly accounted for, the paradox in his actions and what he must do. But I think that this episode was so overwhelmingly effective at making us understand why he's doing what he's doing, even if we hate it, and even if we know that it's going to be the source of so many problems down the line. It's not just one of those stupid plot devices thrown in to create trauma and chaos where it was not previously. It totally makes sense. And I think it's really cool when the writers and the constructors of The Walking Dead can give us a story that feels so fresh, because it seems like everything under the sun has already been done sometimes, But this story came across as incredibly fresh and visceral, and Lenny James is just a consummate performer. I mean, an utter godsend to the show. He brings such a ferocity and an intensity, whether he is lashing out and screaming to be killed, or whether he is taking everything in stride and he's wielding his staff of justice and all is good. But yeah, so it was really cool to see the way that Eastman kind of brought Morgan back into himself, how Morgan intentionally tried to imprison himself, whereas Eastman gave him the opportunity to leave on numerous occasions. And ultimately, they're able to strike up a friendship that I think feels incredibly organic. We have these characters that come and go and whose fates we know will be sealed by the end of the episode. And sometimes it can be hard to get attached to anybody outside of the main ensemble cast, because we know that they're pretty much just cannon fodder. They're going to get launched into the fray of the undead or what have you, and they're simply there to keep the body counts stacking up, whereas everybody else is untouchable. And that did not feel like the case with this week's episode. I mean, Eastman, I think, was an incredibly fascinating character. I love the backstory that we even got for him and how that lended itself to the way that Morgan behaves and sees the world now, and the fact that he was able to find meaning through all of this makes so much sense. I'm really glad that the episode did have a 90-minute span on the clock, because I think that just seeing the sheer amount of time that Eastman took to rehabilitate Morgan, to show him that life is purposeful, to show him that he does not need to end his, but rather to press forward, And so I think getting to see the life that Eastman made for himself and getting to understand where he came from for Morgan was such a transformative experience. And ultimately, I think it was really effective storytelling. I keep using the word effective because this episode just worked on so many different levels. And I'm incredibly glad that we, even though we have so many questions about what's going to happen to our other groups, and I have a sense that probably we're going to be moving back and forth, cycling between those groups for the rest of the first half of the season, still, I think that this was a necessary break. It was something that I was prepared for. I knew that we probably weren't going to be getting any answers about Glenn's fate, but we did get to see the fate of the wolf that Morgan cornered, and well, the guy's still in the picture, and I do believe that unfortunately he's probably going to be given the opportunity to make good on his promise. And it's really interesting to see how Morgan essentially shares his entire backstory with this guy, who immediately refutes it by saying, well, that's your code, this is mine. So it's almost like this scene of kind of grim mutual respect. But then again, the wolf guy is pretty freaking evil, kind of like the psychopath that Eastman encountered as a psychiatrist at the state penitentiary. And well, it was only after killing the guy that Eastman realized that maybe that wasn't as fulfilling as I thought. But in this case, this guy is a present threat to so many people. And if life really is precious, I hope that I think that Morgan and Carol need to have a little heart to heart, maybe a little coffee chat, figure out, see if they can compromise and work together and fuse their talents and approaches in order to protect themselves and the people around them. Because now what Morgan has to adapt to is, you know, kind of being reacculturated, getting used to other people and used to those obligations to other people. I mean, when you think about it, he actually ended up getting Eastman killed as he was still trying to work through his traumas and the deaths that he had caused. And nonetheless, they were able to uphold a friendship and to the very end. I think it was such a cool arc that the two of them got to share. But I certainly think that whereas we might have hoped that Rick and Morgan would go back to being post-apocalyptic BFFs, I fear that the time for that may have passed because, like I said, two opposite ends of the spectrum here. Morgan is an incredibly capable figure, and his motives are entirely understandable. I super ridiculously get it, but this is not going to fly in the long run. So I'll be very curious to see where things go. I'm much more nervous now than ever before, but yeah, I super loved this episode. I loved the writing. I loved the dialogue. I loved the setting. It was kind of reminiscent of even earlier seasons. But yeah, so much worked for this. I really get where Morgan is coming from now more than ever before. I see the danger, of course, that this poses, and the fact of the matter is that Morgan is in a place where he cannot compromise or his entire worldview will shatter, his philosophy will be broken, and his ability to endure, I think, will be severely compromised, if not totally destroyed, which could result in further destruction for everyone else. So he is walking a very fine line. I imagine him crossing a trapeze over a gargantuan ravine with his staff of justice, and oh lordy Lou, Morgan. But dang, Lenny James, this guy, seriously, he deserves an Emmy nomination for this episode alone. Such fabulous work. I was in it. I was believing every piece, just emotionally on fire. It was great. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode as much as I did. As far as other videos I'm doing in the future, I actually might be doing a little retrospective review of Twin Peaks. So stick around for that. And as always, anything I forgot, bring it up in the comments. And you know the rest. I'll be back before you know it.